to our lesson of today, and make sure that at the end of this lesson you are able to attempt these questions, of course together with some other questions which might also come from this subtopic. Our first question is assess the factors which led to the collapse of European capitalism after Second World War. And our second question is account for the rise of United States capitalism. These are our two questions, and so make sure that at the end you are able to attempt this question. Let's now go to background to the rise of United States of America. Let's look background to the United States of America. First of all, my dear students, United States of America achieved her independence on July 4th, 1776, when United States declared her independence, of course, from the British. The 13 British colonies declared that independence, and the independence was declared after a draft which was read by one of the founding fathers of United States of America, who was called Thomas Jefferson. And United States economy has gone through different phases. In fact, United States economy started to rise the time they declared the independence from the British. But if you go back to history, then you'll see that there was one very important period which was, it was in 1812, when the president of the United States of the time, who was called James Monroe, issued the so-called Monroe Doctrine. This is the doctrine which was issued to explain the American foreign policy. Among other things, this doctrine was very important because it brought to the United States what was called the policy of isolation. Policy of isolation. That means the United States of America was isolating herself from the European affair. And it is this policy of isolation which made the United States to develop very fast to be what it is today. And this is the place where we can trace the background to the rise of the United States. But also the United States at the same time, they came later to introduce the policy of, which was called, they came to introduce another policy which allowed them to expand to China and the Philippines, where they started to invest in those areas and so on. I shall come see it later in detail. But then this is the way we can trace the beginning of United States development to what it is today as the leading capitalist superpower. As I said, the very important 4 principles which was issued by James Monroe, and in fact they're in Monroe Doctrine. One of them is that that the continents, North America and South America, they were no longer open to colonization by any European power. That means after those South American countries and North American countries have achieved their independence, European power should never again think of coming to recolonize those areas. Why? Because the United States wanted to turn these areas to become her areas of influence. In fact, they wanted to make that areas to become their neocolonial there are no neocolonial states. So this is the way United States then grew to become one of the very powerful countries in the world. And also, in that doctrine also another thing was that if any European power interfere with the independent republics in Latin America, United States will consider such action unfriendly. That means they'll consider such action as unfriendly. That means United States then can go to war against that particular country. On the other hand, they were still insisting that European countries should never think of coming to recolonize the Western Hemisphere. That means the North American countries and South American countries. Also, this doctrine has reaffirmed the neutrality of the United States toward Europe. That means they brought out what was called the policy of isolation. This is what it means by the policy of isolation. That United States of America, it is isolating. She is isolating herself from the European affairs. Isolating herself from European affairs. So this is the way it is, my dear students. Let's now look at the reasons for decline. Let's now look at the reasons for decline of Western Europe. Remember, we are talking of the rise of the United States as the leading capitalist superpower. But before the rise of the United States to become a leading capitalist superpower, the European countries, in fact, they were at the top. But the collapse of European capitalism is what gave way to the rise of United States capitalism. So, before looking at the rise of United States capitalism, the factors for the rise of US capitalism, let's first look, what were the factors which led the decline of European capitalism? The first point which led to the first reason reason which led to the decline of European capitalism is the deep involvement of First and Second World War. European countries have deeply involved in First and Second World War. And because of that deep involvement in the war, then in fact, they were to incur a lot of costs. They were to incur a lot of costs. If you look at First World War, European countries like Britain, France, German, they all started the war from the beginning until the end of the war. First World War started in 1914, and all countries I've mentioned, they were in until the end of the war in 1918. Second World War, the same, started from the beginning. All countries were in until the end of the war. So, my dear students, as you can see, these countries have been deeply involved in First and Second World War. This is quite contrary to the United States experience. US always joined the both war at the end of the war. They joined the First World War in 1917, and they joined the Second World War in December 1941, you can imagine, while the war was nearly coming to the end. So, European countries have been deeply involved in First and Second World War, and in fact, it brought a lot of damage to their countries. So that is the first reason for decline of European capitalism. The second reason is that Western European imperialist states were the battlefield. They were the places where all the wars were fought. When you speak of First World War, my dear students, you'll see that the war was fought in Europe to a larger extent. Of course, some countries also they have faced, they were also battlefield, but we are talking of, the center battlefield, it was Europe. If you speak of Germany, for instance, it was so highly affected by the war. Second World War especially. Remember, during the Second World War, even the weapons which were used during the Second World War, they are somehow more sophisticated and advanced compared to those which were used during the First World War. If you look, for instance, German was bombed. Some German cities were bombed, by the British Royal, Royal Forces. Towns like Dresden, for instance, Munich, they were so highly attacked during the war. And for the British, London, Birmingham, Coventry, they were the target during the attack of Germans to Britain by using the warplane. So you can see, my dear students, that these countries were affected because the Western European countries were the battlefield. And so they have to face the socio-economic destruction of economic infrastructures. We are talking of things like industries. We are talking of things like bridges, roads, even farms and so on, social services. So at the end of the war, European countries were so highly destroyed, by the war. Another thing, my dear students, is that the post-Second World War left European countries very highly indebted. European countries, they have incurred a lot of debt because of war. How? Because they borrowed money, especially Britain. Britain borrowed a lot of money from United States of America, at least at a time when she wanted to win the war against the Axis forces. Remember, during the Second World War, United States of America was neutral during the war. But in 1939, at the outbreak of the war, they came up with a law which was called a new Neutrality Act. According to that new Neutrality Act, United States of America agreed to sell weapons to Britain, but they are going to sell in cash and carry. And Britain therefore was buying weapons from the Americans by supplying raw materials to the Americans and also buying cash. But also, but in 1941, Britain's economic condition was not good. So they asked for the Americans to supply to Britain weapons, but in loan. So the Americans, again, they passed a law which was called, a Landlines Act of 1941. Under Landlines Act of 1941, USA started to supply weapons to Britain in loan. So you can see that's why at the end of the war, the country like Britain was very highly indebted, particularly by USA, because USA was supplying to the British weapons and other supplies. So this is another reason for the decline of European imperialism. Because of the war, at the end of the war, they have to pay debt and so on. Another point, my dear students, is that some of the colonies which were controlled by these European countries, they were burdened. What do we mean when we say they were burdened? That some of the colonies were burdened. That some of the European countries, they used to have some colonies which did not have any economic advantage. They were only for prestige. Let's take, for example, a colony like Mauritania, which is found in Northwest Africa, Mauritania. This colony is almost a desert. Or, for instance, others like Chad, for instance. You see? Chad. You know, I mean, and so on and so forth. So some of the colonies were burdened, and the metropolitan government, that means the colonizing state, sometimes they have to use their resources to run those colonies. So because of this, they were spending a lot of money in running the colonies, money which could be spent to improve the economy. So again, this is the reason why there was the collapse of European imperialism. Another point is the colonization of the former colonies. My dear students, here we are talking of those colonies which were of economic advantage. Some of the colonies had a lot of resources, and these European countries, they used to be paying so much on those colonies. Remember, the Americans were not to be affected by this because United States did not believe in colonial style. They believed in neocolonial system. They believed in neocolonial system. So European countries were very much affected, especially after the colonization. Let's take, for example, the British. In 1947, they lost India. India was one of the very British large colony. Britain was getting almost everything from India, starting from market, raw materials, and other resources. But India got independence in 1947. That means Britain has lost a very important colony, a colony which she used to supply different kind of goods. The colonies which in fact used to boost the British industries. Remember, in our previous lesson we spoke about industrialization, and one thing we said is Britain has been able to develop and become a wealthy superpower and the workshop of the world because of because of the industrializing India and Canada. And India, remember, population of India is so large, and having India for your colony is always you're going to have a very large market, and this is what this is the situation in Britain. So, my dear students, as we can see, European countries were affected because of decolonization. If you look back, for instance, to 1960s, a lot of countries were getting independence, particularly African countries, to the extent that the British Prime Minister of that time, Macmillan, once he said a wind of change is sweeping across Africa continent because of the number of African countries which were getting independence. So, my dear students, another reason for the decline of European imperialism is the Great Economic Depression. The economic depression which occurred in 1929 to 1933. This economic depression, my students, has affected many countries in the world. It is only USSR which was not affected because of socialist economy, which is, of course, we know that socialist economy is planned. And economic depression is one of the characteristics of any capitalist economy because it is unplanned. But a country which was affected the most, it was United States of America. But USA succeeded to recover after they have introduced the New Deal policy, but not to European countries, particularly Britain. Britain was not very much affected, but her recovery was very slow. And in fact, while she was trying to recover with other European countries, they were caught by the outbreak of Second World War. So they suffered from great economic depression, which started in 1929 to 1933. So the economy were very much affected. So, my dear students, this is another reason for the decline of European imperialism. Another point which also can explain the decline of European capitalism is that these people lost their colonies. These countries lost their colonies. My dear students, if you look, for instance, if you look back to the time of colonialism, you realize that France and Britain together, they used to control about 4/5 of the world colonies. 4/5 of the world colonies. That means in every 5 colonies, they were controlling these two countries, Britain and France. So it means they used to rely so much on the colonies for exploitation. And the colonization of their former colonies, in fact, have to affect them a lot, especially those colonies which has got enough resources, particularly minerals. We are talking of agricultural raw materials and so on. So they were very much affected. Let's take, for example, Britain. Britain lost India. Britain lost India in 1947, and India is like a subcontinent. It's a very large country with a very large number of people. So when you speak of market, the British, in fact, they were enjoying that market of India at a time when they were colonizing India. But India in 1947 got the independence. It means the British were so much affected. Not only that, but also in 1960s, a lot of African countries got independence. And remember what I said earlier, most of the colonies in the world, they were either ruled by Britain or the French. So these two countries were very, very much affected. Not only this, but also can look some other countries like, the Spanish, the Portuguese. Also, they used to have some colonies, so they were also affected. The only country which at that time didn't have the colony was German. So European countries were affected by, after losing their colonies, and that has to lead to the decline of European imperialism. My dear students, after looking at the reasons for decline of European imperialism, let us now look at the impact of decline of European capitalism. What is the impact of decline of European capitalism? The first impact of decline of European capitalism is the colonization of former European colonies of Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe. That means those countries which used to be under the control of those European countries, they started to get their independence. Why? Because the European countries were not strong enough to oppose that power of decolonization, especially for those countries which started the armed struggle. They could not withstand with those people who were determined to achieve their independence by any means possible. So the only option they had, it was to grant independence to those people. For instance, we have the example of Algeria. The Algerians were fighting against the French during the time of struggle, during the time of liberation of their country. And the French, at that time, remember, they have just came back from the Second World War. In fact, remember French, they were held by the Americans during the Second World War. It is the Americans, in fact, who liberated France during the Second World War. So the French were not good at all during the post-Second World War. But then they have to come and confront the Algerians. The consequence was the French, in fact, they were defeated, and later they agreed to grant independence to the Algerian people. That goes the same to other countries. The British sometimes, they granted independence because they didn't just wait to see another armed struggle. So for that case, this contributed to the decline of European capitalism because they lost the colonies which they were so highly relying on. That is the first impact. The second impact is the shift of balance of power in the capitalist camp. The balance power has shifted in favor of United States of America. Remember, before the Second World War, the balance of power was in favor of European countries. That means if you speak of the countries which are powerful in the world, you talk of Germany, you talk of Britain, France, and so on. But all of them were European countries. But because of the decline of Western Europe, then there was a shift of power which was shifted to go to United States of America. Of course, together with Russia, though she was not powerful economically, but militarily, Russia could stand against the United States. So you can say there was a sort of shift or balance of power in favor of the United States of America. That is the second impact. The third impact is that there was the shift to world financial center. Remember I said earlier, before Second World War, of course we know that London, Paris, they were regarded as the financial center of the world, but then it shifted and got to New York City, United States. That now people were looking in America as a new workshop of the world. And whatever people want to buy, one will fly to go to America to buy it, and not in Europe. So there is another impact is the shift to world financial center. Of course, there is a spelling mistake here, I'm sorry, from London and Paris to New York City, United States of America. So this is what we can say, my dear students. Okay, after that, my dear students, let's now look at the reasons for the rise of United States as the leading capitalist superpower. Earlier in this topic, my dear students, I told you how United States started to rise as a capitalist superpower starting from 1776 on July 4th after declared their independence from the British. And the way the United States has gone through the introduction of Monroe Doctrine, for instance, we said it. Also, United States later, they came to introduce open door policy, which was then declared openly by the Truman Doctrine of 1947 and so on. So United States, as we speak today, is a leading capitalist superpower. So let's look at the reasons for the rise of United States of America as a leading capitalist superpower. The first reason is that United States did not participate full in the First and Second World War. As we said earlier, the both wars United States joined late. The First World War she joined in 1917, and the Second World War United States joined in 1941, December 1941, after attack by the Japanese. After the Japanese had attacked at Pearl Harbor and so forced the Americans to declare war against Japan, and so she joined officially the Second World War. So you can see, while European countries have started the war right from the beginning, the Americans joined the war when the wars were nearly coming to the end. So they were not to be affected much by the war because they did not fight that war from the beginning. So this is the first reason which can explain why United States then rose to become a leading capitalist superpower. Another point here is that with the exception of Japanese attack at Hawaii, United States did not fight war in her soil. That means war was not fought in the American soil. War was fought in other countries, but not in the American soil, with that exception of the Japanese attack at Hawaii. So, my dear students, as you can see, one of the things which we said has affected European countries is that European countries were the battlefield that it was the places where war was fought. And if war is fought in your country, you have to expect the worst. You have to expect the destruction of socio-economic infrastructures, which include social services, include industries and other economic infrastructures and so on. So United States did not have to face that, and at the end of the war, United States was as good as before the beginning of the war. So you can see this is another reason for the rise of United States as a leading capitalist superpower. Another point, my dear students, is maintaining of United States policy of isolation. Of course, I said earlier that policy of isolation was introduced in America by the doctrine which was issued by President James Monroe in 1812. And that doctrine has said a lot of things, but most important, we said that doctrine has isolated United States from the European affairs. That means whatever conflict occur in Europe, the Americans will not interfere. And by not interfering in the European affairs, the United States has been able to keep herself out of the conflict, which in fact will retard the economic development of their country. So for that case, they were able to develop much because of this. But policy isolation also has taken some, some economic translations. That policy of isolation also meant that they were also isolating themselves economically by not allowing goods to come to America from other countries. And it was like a sort of protectionism. And so they were able to protect their industries and market against the European goods. Remember, European countries like Britain at that time had already industrialized. We are talking of 1812 when this doctrine was issued. United States has already industrialized, and she was looking for a market. And in fact, she was practicing a free trade. And the Americans then introduced policy of isolation. Not only that, they were isolating themselves from the conflict of Europe, but they also isolated themselves from European countries bringing their goods to America. And for that case, they were able to boost their industries. And after they realized that their industries now are powerful enough, they came to introduce open door policy. My dear students, another reason for the rise of United States capitalism to become a leading capitalist superpower was the introduction of Marshall Plan in 1947. Marshall Plan was introduced in 1947. This is the idea of General George Marshall, who was the Secretary of the State of the United States of America. He introduced this Marshall Plan as an economic package of helping European countries to recover from the damage of war. But this was designed not only to help European countries to recover, but also it had a lot of things to do with the rise of United States economy. What they planned, what they gave to European countries it wasn't just like a free lunch. They gave some aid to European countries, but there were some conditions. And one of the conditions is that those European countries which will have access to the Marshall Plan package, they have also, they have to start to grant independence to their colonies. So this was associated with decolonization. And once those colonies are decolonized, the United States will come very quickly and introduce neocolonialism. So you can see Marshall Plan has played a very, very major role to the rise of the United States economy to become what it is today. But also Marshall Plan, not only that, but also Marshall Plan, also it had yet another thing. Remember, they didn't give to European countries cash money. In fact, they gave European countries aid in terms of supply, in terms of supplies. They were giving them weapons. They were supplying them with food and other things. So through Marshall Plan, European countries were turned to become the market of European goods. So Marshall Plan has played a very major role to the rise of United States economy to become a leading capitalist superpower. Another point is the formation of Bretton Woods institutions. The formation of Bretton Woods institutions. In July 1944, in a place called the Briton Woods in New Hampshire, the Americans, of course, they formed the two very important monetary institutions. We are talking of World Bank and IMF. World Bank and IMF, International Monetary Fund and World Bank, which was in fact formerly called the International Development Bank for Reconstruction, the World Bank. So World Bank was formed in New Hampshire together with IMF, and the United States used to have an iron share in World Bank. And any country which asks for loan from the World Bank, in fact, they have to adhere to conditions. And the Americans, they are using World Bank and IMF as their institutions of spreading the so-called dollar imperialism, controlling the third world countries. They provide loans to the third world country, but they put some conditions which will allow the American investments to go to those countries, which in fact will allow the American influence and so on. So the formation of Bretton Woods institutions in July 1944 is one of the very important factors for the rise of the United States to become a capitalist superpower. Another point, my dear students, is the impact of Second World War to USA. While other countries were affected by Second World War negatively, United States of America was affected by Second World War positively. That, first of all, United States became so powerful country and respected by other countries. In fact, United States in 1945, on June 6th, she took a leading role in liberating France. Remember, France at that time was in the hands of Adolf Hitler already, you see? So the Americans forces led by Dwight Eisenhower, the one who later came to become the president of the United States. General Dwight Eisenhower entered into France in what was called the D-Day operation, and they liberated France from the Nazis. And this, in fact, gave United States a lot of respect to other countries in the world. They are starting to look at the United States as a real leading capitalist superpower because of the role she played. Also, the discoveries and use of atomic bomb in 1945, that made the United States to be considered as the powerful country in terms of military, in terms of military, because they discovered and used the weapons which no one had. So that made the United States to become, again, so respected and also so powerful. Another thing is the United States also took a leading role in the establishment of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was established in 1949, and its first headquarters in Paris before Charles de Gaulle rejected, and in fact they shifted and go to Brussels in Belgium. But this is what the United States has done. That is the impact of Second World War and the way it has played, the role it has played to the rise of United States. My dear students, let's now look at the impact of the rise of United States capitalism in the world. How the world was affected by the rise of United States capitalism. The first way the world was affected was the colonization of the third world countries. The third world countries started to get independence. Remember, I said it earlier that one among the conditions which was put as the countries to have an access to the Marshall Plan, it was decolonization. That you decolonize your colony, and then you are going to get the financial package from the Marshall Plan aid. And some countries got independence. But not only that, but also United States. She supported decolonization of some Africans and Asian countries, of course, not for it wasn't for granted, because she wanted to introduce neocolonialism. And so they supported decolonization of some of the third world countries, African countries and Asian countries. And this, of course, was done by giving them some material supports, moral supports, even sometimes supporting them in the UN and so on and so on and so forth. So that is the very important first impact of the United States rising as a leading capitalist superpower. Another point is introduction of neocolonialism. Of course, we have said it. The Americans never believe in the exploitation through proper colonial exploitation. They believed in neocolonial exploitation. Neocolonial exploitation means that a country is free, but they insert their mechanisms to make sure that they keep on exploiting the colonies, as long as they want. So there was the introduction of neocolonialism. So the Americans, remember, they're the pioneer of neocolonialism. Even before the European countries introduced neocolonialism after they had granted independence, the Americans have started it in Western Hemisphere. They were exploiting the Southern American countries, as well as the Central American countries and countries like Mexico through neocolonialism by investing in those countries and so on. Another point is the collapse of former Soviet Union and socialism in Eastern Europe. This is more recent, the collapse of former Soviet Union and socialism in Eastern Europe. In fact, the rise of the United States as a capitalist superpower has contributed to the collapse of socialism, because these two countries, USSR and the USA, they used to have an underground battle during the time of Cold War. And in fact, there were a lot of things happening during those days, including sabotaging and so on. So United States of America, in fact, one can say, won against USSR because socialism is no more. And if you look back to what happened during the Truman Doctrine of 1947. Truman Doctrine has spoken about to contain the spread of communism as one of the very important American foreign policy, something which was again said by Ronald Reagan when he issued that doctrine, which was called Reagan Doctrine, to roll back the communist state. And looking at this, then you realize, my dear students, that the collapse of Soviet Union, in fact, has a hand of the Americans. So the rise of United States capitalism contributed to the collapse of Soviet Union and the socialist bloc. Another impact of the rise of United States capitalism is the rise of United States as the guardian of capitalism in the world. United States rose to become the guardian of capitalism in the world. That whatever things happen regarding capitalism in the world, the Americans will be there to intervene. And in fact, they even went far and become the policeman of the world. Whatever things happen in the world, the Americans, they believe that they have the moral authority of going there and intervene. And in fact, it's because of these reasons that you can find that they have a lot of military bases all over the world, pretending, of course, that they want to defend capitalist system and so on. Another impact, my dear students, is the outbreak of Cold War and arms race. Of course, we have seen this, of course, in the previous topic of threat to world peace. How the rise of the United States as a leading capitalist superpower contributed to the outbreak of Cold War. Remember, Cold War was between two countries, USSR and USA. And these two countries, of course, they are the one who had that much tension, misunderstanding, and conflict. Then later it was spread to other countries. But if you want to look at the core of Cold War, you'll have to focus to these two countries. So the rise of the United States of America, of course, and the rise of USSR at those days contributed to the emergence of Cold War and, in fact, also arms race. We're not going to look at the questions that I gave you earlier in the beginning of our lesson. My dear students, we have got two questions. Assess the factors which led to the collapse of European capitalism after Second World War. And our second question is account for the rise of USA capitalism. My dear students, Let's look at the first question. Assess the factors which led to the collapse of Western European capitalism after Second World War. My dear students, we have said about the reasons for the collapse of European capitalism. Let's look at this first point, deep involvement in First and Second World War. Of course, we said it, that European countries started the war from the very beginning. From day one when that war broke out, they started that war. Remember, the countries which were involved in First World War is like Britain, France, and Russia, which of course they used to be in one alliance system which was called the Triple Entente. And in the other side, there was Germany, Austro-Hungary, of course, and Italy. Even though Italy, remember, withdrew from the war. In fact, they remained neutral until 1915 when they decided to join the Triple Entente. But then, if you look at that, United States was not there. And they joined that war from the beginning of the war in 1914. And they went through that war to the end of the war. That's why we speak of deep involvement in First World War. If you look at Second World War, my dear students, you're also going to see that it was the same. That European countries also started the war right away when the war broke out in 1939. And they kept on fighting that war until the end of the war. So because of this deep involvement in First and Second World War, in fact, these countries have to be affected. Imagine, my dear students, the war to continue for about 4 years, a war to continue about 3 years, non-stop. It should affect the people, and it should affect the people and the economy. So European countries were very much affected because of this war situation. The second point is that Europe was a battlefield of the war. Europe was a battlefield of war. Just beside their deep involvement in the war, they were the battlefield. Because you can involve in the war deeply, but war is not fought in your country, the way we saw to the United States of America. But they were involving in the war deeply, but also war was fought in their country. Their countries were the battlefield. And whenever there is war in your country, you have to expect the wars. You have to expect the destruction of socio-economic infrastructures, the roads, the railways, the bridges. And unfortunately, among the very important military targets, it was the bridges and roads. It was the industries. During the Second World War, Hitler, for instance, by using their very sophisticated plane, they used to attack the British industries at Coventry. So at the end of the war, the British were very much affected because most of their industries were destroyed. They target the industries because they believe it is a very important and good way of incapacitating your enemy. And this is what they were doing during the war. Another point is the collapse of the colonial system, as we have said, that some countries used to be the colonies of European countries. They started to get their independence. We can take the example of what happened, for instance, in Asia, for instance, Southeast Asia. You can take the example of the French colonial rule in Indochina. They used to colonize Vietnam. But what happened? After Second World War, the Vietnamese, they took advantage of the French being affected by the Second World War, and so they started the War of Liberation. The war which was led by a Vietnamese nationalist called Ho Chi Minh. And the consequence to that war, it is that the French decided to run away and they left Vietnam before the Americans came to join and start a war against Vietnam. So you can see, my dear students, that European countries were very highly affected by the war, and that led to the collapse of colonial system. Of course, we said also about what happened in France, in the French colonies of Algeria. The Algerian people also fought against the French and be able to get their independence. But for the British, they were much more clever, in fact. They didn't just wait for the people to start the uprising. They granted independence, even though they tested the African bitterness during the Mau Mau resistance in Kenya in 1952, as you can see. So there was something going on in the world, particularly with regards to the colonial system. Countries were demanding independence. And by losing those colonies, it means they have lost the very important area that they could use to get raw materials, to get cheap labor, to invest and so on. Another point is that European countries were highly indebted. They were very highly indebted. That at the end of the war, they had a very, very large debt. And this, of course, I've mentioned, it includes countries like Britain. Britain took a lot of money from the United States as a loan. So at the end of the war, they were supposed to pay back the loan. And So for that case, they have to spend much of their money to repay the loan. So because of what I have just said, then these countries were also affected because money which could be used to revive the economy which was destroyed by the war, that money has to be used to pay back the loan which they took from the United States. This is another way in which European capitalism were affected and led to the collapse of capitalism in their respective countries. Another point here is the effect of Great Depression. These countries of Europe were affected by economic depression. In fact, as you can see, a country like Britain, as I said earlier, was not very much affected. Also France was not very much affected, even though, as you can see, Germany was very much affected. United States was extremely affected than any other country because, remember, one of the causes of economic depression, it is overproduction. And the Americans, they were overproduced during and after the First World War. That's why we spoke about the economic boom in our, in our previous lesson. We spoke about economic boom, how the economy of USA was rising because in 1920s. So always when there is economic boom, it is always followed by economic depression because of that cycle, which of course, it is called the capitalist economic cycle. Capitalist economic cycle, which is characterized by crisis. Crisis in the sense that here there is, overproduction, which of course overproduction can cause economic recession. If care is not taken, it can go to economic depression, and then after economic depression, there is a recovery, and then recovery, it goes again to boom, so it goes on that way. So here we have got boom, which is good, people are enjoying, standard of living is so good, purchasing power of the people is very high, but if this boom continue, then it will lead to what we call economic recession or economic crisis, because here there will be overproduction, that what has been produced can surpass the market demand. And if the market is small compared to what has been produced, then it will lead to economic economic crisis or recession. And then economic recession, if it is not, if care is not taken, it can go down to lead to economic depression. And slowly, some measures can be taken and recover and so on. So as you can see, my dear students, European countries were affected, but not as much as USA. But USA was able to recover from economic depression after the introduction of New Deal. European countries, particularly Britain, did not have any proper measures to be applied to save the economy. Unfortunately, before they had recovered fully from the Great Economic Depression, they were caught on the way by the outbreak of Second World War. And so the economy were to be totally affected. So you can see, my dear students, European capitalism declined because of the effect of the economic depression, which was due to absence of the proper and the right measures to take care of that economic depression. Another point is that some colonies were the burden. Of course, we have said that some of the colonies were only taken for prestige. You have the colonies and there was nothing to exploit. There was, those colonies were like a barren. So for that case, these people, of course, they have to take money from their government to run the colonies. Remember, in spite of those colonies being unproductive, but there were some administrators who are there. There were some people who are there. There were some services which had to be given to people and so on. So sometimes they have to spend their money to run some of the colonies. So for that case, as you can see, this led to the collapse of the economy and so on. So my dear students, that was the first question, and I'm quite sure that that question you can attempt it now, and also you can apply those same points if that question comes in other way around. Now let's go to the second question. Account for the rise of USA capitalism. The first point here, my dear students, is United States did not participate fully in the First and Second World War. Of course, I have said it, that the Americans' participation in the First and Second World War was very minimum. She joined the both war when the war were nearly coming to the end. She joined the First World War in 1917. And as you can see, the effect of the war to the Americans was not as much as the way European countries were affected. Another point is that war was not fought in the American soil. Of course, we said, with the exception of what happens at Pearl Harbor, that war was not fought in the American soil. And among the damage of the war, which are so bitter, it is the direct consequence of war, which is the bombing of the very important and strategic economic areas. For instance, we are talking of industries being destroyed. We are speaking of roads, railways, and other structures, houses, and so on, which sometimes they are the target is. That's always enemy want to attack to incapacitate your enemy, and so on. So this is exactly what happened. But the Americans were not to be affected by all this because war was not fought in their soil. Another point is the cosmopolitans of the American citizens. Cosmopolitans My dear students, what do we mean by cosmopolitans of the American citizens? And when the cosmopolitans, it means the American citizens, they're the people who come from different originalities, people of different descents. So you can see in America, for instance, there are some black people in America. That means people from Africa. There are some people from Ireland. There are some people from Britain. There are some people from Germany, from Japan, from China, and so on. So because of having people from different originality, then those people also, they have got different talents. For instance, when you speak of shipbuilding, there are some people who are so good in shipbuilding. You can find maybe there are some Italians who can do that job. When you talk of people who are good in finance, we are talking of Jews. They are very good financially and so on. When you talk of people who are so good in arts, games, and sports, you can speak of the black people in America. So for that case, America is having different kind of people who can engage in different activities. And this is making the United States to produce almost everything on her own and not depend on other countries. So cosmopolitans of the American citizens also is one of the reasons which made the United States to become to rise as a leading capitalist nation. So this can also be a reason for the rise of US capitalism. Another point is the Marshall Plan. Of course, we have said about Marshall Plan, what role Marshall Plan has played, particularly in providing aid to West European countries, which was the basic aim of Marshall Plan. But of course, we said Marshall Plan has extended the American investment in Europe. Marshall Plan has forced European countries to recolonize their colonies and so on. And the United States was very much benefited by Marshall Plan. Bretton Woods institutions, IMF and World Bank, these two institutions were so important, as I've said, and they were used by the Americans as their tools of penetrating to the third world countries after, particularly IMF and World Bank, when they want to give loans to those countries, to some third world countries, they put some conditions. The conditions which will allow the Americans to go to invest in those countries. Conditions which will allow the spread of dollar imperialism and so on. Another point is the role of multinational corporations. The Americans had a lot of multinational corporations. Multinational corporations which had invested capital all over the world. Here we're talking of Pepsi, for instance, Coca-Cola, for instance. We're talking of Nike, and so on and so forth. Those American companies, they have invested in different areas in the world, and they're exploiting those countries they have invested, and the money goes back to America, to boost the development and expansion of American economy. So this is also another very important reasons for the rise of United States capitalism. Of course, lastly is the impact of Second World War. Of course, we have just finished to see how Second World War has contributed to the expansion of American economy. My dear students, with these two questions and the answers that I've just provided to you, now I'm sure that you are very well you are very well conversant with these two questions, of course, with the lessons in general, and you can now be able to attempt the questions which might come from.
Kipindi cha Darasa Online kimeletwa kwenu na Chuo Kikuu cha Sauti Mbeya.
Okay, but keep moving. You gotta see that, remember? Hey, yeah. This last step is for you. Jerusalema ikayalami. Miuma no gagati. Kuzoba no gagati. Nani press. Nani para no stress. Kukufisha shena so kiss. insecure. Oh, I'm insecure.
Asa cheza nikone Jembe toka Chato Magufuli ndo rais wa wanyo.
We keep it 100, yo, we never pretend. Can my friend and your friends them be friends?
Now show me quarantine.